The first time my brother called me replaceable, we were standing in the lobby of the bank that used to belong to our father. Last week, I replaced him. He didn't know it yet. He was in the executive conference room on the 22nd floor of Hawthorne National Bank in downtown Charlotte, pacing in front of a wall of glass that overlooked the skyline. The board had just voted. The documents had been signed. The regulators had been notified. Control had shifted quietly, legally, permanently. And the name at the top of the acquisition agreement wasn't his. It was mine. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life, my older brother Nathan built his identity around one belief, that I would never survive without him. He used to say it like a joke. He never meant it that way. If you've ever grown up in the shadow of someone who shines too loudly, you know how this works. There's the golden child and the extra, the heir and the afterthought. The one groomed for the future and the one politely redirected out of the room when real conversations start happening. Nathan was 5 years older than me, confident, loud, athletic. The kind of person teachers described as a natural leader. He learned how to command a room before he learned how to drive. I learned how to watch. Our father, William Ellison, built Hawthorne National from a modest community bank into a respected regional institution across North Carolina and South Carolina. It wasn't flashy, but it was stable. Conservative lending, strong relationships, quiet growth. Nathan grew up in the bank's hallways. By 15, he could read a balance sheet. By 22, he had an internship in corporate lending waiting for him. Everyone called him the future of Hawthorne. I was the one who asked too many questions. At 17, I asked Dad why we were overweight in commercial real estate exposure in Mecklenburg County. He laughed like I'd said something cute. Nathan rolled his eyes. "At least wait until you understand the basics before you try to fix things," he said. That was the first time he used the word basics like a weapon. The moment that changed everything happened when I was 23. Dad had a mild stroke, nothing catastrophic, but enough to scare him into early retirement. The board met to decide succession. I had just finished my Master's in quantitative finance at Columbia. I flew home for the meeting, not because I expected anything, but because I believed I had something valuable to contribute. I suggested diversifying into fintech partnerships and reducing exposure to speculative commercial developments downtown. I had numbers, models, projections. Nathan didn't even look at my slides. "This isn't a classroom, Mara," he said in front of the entire board. "This is a bank. You don't run a bank off theory." A few board members smiled politely. One actually chuckled. Then Nathan said the line that stayed with me for 13 years. "You've always needed someone to ground you. Without me cleaning up after you, you'd drown in your own overthinking." It was subtle humiliation. Clean, efficient, delivered with a grin. The board voted him in as CEO that afternoon. I left Charlotte the next morning without saying goodbye. I didn't leave angry. That's what people assume. They imagine revenge starting with rage. Mine started with silence. I moved to Chicago and took an analyst position at a mid-sized private equity firm called Ridgewell Partners. Entry-level, long hours, no prestige, just spreadsheets and stress. I didn't tell anyone I was the daughter of a bank founder. I didn't mention Nathan. I didn't defend myself. I learned. I learned how distressed assets are evaluated. I learned how regulatory pressure can be leveraged. I learned how control shifts quietly through preferred shares and debt covenants. I learned how companies collapse not because of enemies, but because of ego. Nathan thrived in Charlotte. He rebranded Hawthorne National as Hawthorne Financial Group. New logo, sleeker website. Aggressive expansion into commercial real estate loans and high-yield development projects. He was on local business magazine covers. He gave interviews about modernizing community banking. He loved the phrase disruptive growth. For the first 3 years, his strategy seemed brilliant. Profits surged, loan volume doubled. The bank expanded into Atlanta and Nashville. Our father watched with pride from his lake house, telling anyone who would listen that Nathan had taken Hawthorne to the next level. What no one noticed, except analysts like me, was how concentrated their risk had become. Too much exposure to luxury mixed-use developments. Too much reliance on short-term wholesale funding. Too much confidence in a housing market that was starting to wobble. At Ridgewell, I specialized in financial institutions. I built models predicting stress points under shifting interest rates. Hawthorne Financial appeared in one of my screening reports 5 years after I left home. Moderate liquidity pressure, commercial loan delinquency uptick, overextension in speculative projects. I stared at the name on my screen for a long time. Hawthorne Financial Group. Nathan Ellison, CEO. I didn't feel anger. I felt opportunity. I brought the file to my managing partner, Daniel Pierce, a man who measured emotion the way he measured risk, sparingly. Hawthorne's fundamentals are eroding, I said. Strong brand. Good community relationships, poor risk discipline. If interest rates climb another 50 basis points, they'll be squeezed. Daniel skimmed the report. You think they're salvageable? With the right capital structure and leadership. He raised an eyebrow. Leadership? They're running hot, I said carefully. They need restraint. We began quietly purchasing Hawthorne's subordinated debt on the secondary market, not aggressively, not publicly, just enough to matter. 18 months later, interest rates rose faster than anyone expected. Commercial developers defaulted on 2 major Charlotte projects. Hawthorne's quarterly earnings dropped sharply. Analysts started asking questions. Nathan went on television to reassure investors. This is temporary volatility, he said confidently. We're positioned for long-term growth. I watched the interview from my apartment in Chicago. His voice hadn't changed. Same certainty, same dismissal of doubt. Ridgewell increased its position. When Hawthorne needed short-term liquidity to stabilize its balance sheet, we were there, through an affiliate fund, offering a capital injection structured as convertible preferred shares. Nathan signed the agreement within 48 hours. He didn't know I had structured the terms. The clause was simple. If certain capital ratios dipped below a defined threshold, preferred shares would automatically convert into voting common stock, granting majority control to the holder. That threshold was closer than he realized. Over the next year, market conditions tightened further. 2 more commercial developments stalled. Regulatory scrutiny intensified. The capital ratio dipped. The conversion triggered. By the time Hawthorne's board called an emergency meeting, Ridgewell Partners held a controlling stake. I booked a flight to Charlotte that night. The boardroom looked exactly as I remembered. Long walnut table. Framed photos of community events lining the walls. A portrait of our father near the door. Nathan stood at the head of the table when I walked in. He froze. For a second, he didn't recognize me in a navy suit instead of jeans and notebooks. Then recognition hit. What are you doing here? He asked. Daniel followed behind me carrying a folder. I represent Ridgewell's interests, I said calmly. And as of this morning, Ridgewell represents the majority of voting shares. Silence spread across the table like ink in water. That's not possible, Nathan said. Daniel slid the documents across the table. Conversion clause activated at 8:02 a.m. Control has legally transferred. Nathan's jaw tightened. You engineered this. I met his eyes. No. Your capital structure did. Board members avoided looking at either of us. You sabotaged your own family, he said, voice low. I shook my head. You over-leveraged a community institution to chase headlines. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Regulatory reports were reviewed. Risk assessments presented. The numbers spoke louder than either of us. By unanimous vote, excluding Nathan, he was removed as CEO. Interim leadership would be appointed by Ridgewell. I didn't celebrate. I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk where we used to wait for Dad to finish work when we were kids. Nathan came out 20 minutes later. You always needed someone to ground you, he said quietly, almost to himself. You'd never make it without me. I looked at him steadily. I didn't need grounding, I said. I needed room. The public announcement framed the transition as a strategic restructuring. Nathan retained a minority stake, but no operational authority. I was appointed executive chair to oversee stabilization. Local media buzzed. Speculation ran wild. Few connected Ridgewell's deal architect to the Ellison family. Dad called me that evening. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. You never asked what I was building, I replied. There was a long pause. I thought you left because you didn't care about the bank, he said. I left because I cared too much to watch it become something reckless. Over the next 6 months, we tightened lending standards, sold off high-risk assets, rebuilt capital buffers, and refocused on community banking. Profits dipped before they stabilized. The headlines shifted from drama to cautious optimism. Nathan stayed away from the office. We met once, privately, in a quiet coffee shop outside the city. He looked smaller without the title. Was this revenge? He asked. I thought about it. Revenge implies destruction. I hadn't destroyed Hawthorne, I'd preserved it. It was responsibility, I said. He stared into his cup. You could have warned me. I tried, I said gently. Years ago, he nodded slowly. I thought you needed me, he admitted. I thought you needed to believe that. We didn't hug, we didn't reconcile in some cinematic way. Healing doesn't work like that, but something shifted. The final board vote to confirm permanent leadership came 9 months after the acquisition. Hawthorne Financial would return to its original name, Hawthorne National Bank, stability over spectacle. I stood in the lobby the morning the new signage went up. Employees walked past, some nodding respectfully. None of them knew the full story. Nathan watched from across the room. There was no hatred in his expression anymore, just recognition. Later that day, he approached me in the executive conference room, the same one where this story began. You replaced me, he said, not accusing, just stating fact. I shook my head. I replaced instability, I said. Not you, he exhaled slowly. For what it's worth, he said, I was wrong. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was enough. That night, I stayed late in the office. The skyline glowed outside the windows. The bank's financial reports were stacked neatly on the desk. I thought about the girl who left Charlotte at 23, dismissed and underestimated. I thought about the models she built at midnight in Chicago apartments. I thought about the clause she inserted into a capital agreement that changed everything. My brother once told me I would never make it without him. Last week, I quietly acquired his bank, but the real acquisition wasn't financial, it was freedom. I didn't need to destroy him to prove I was capable. I just needed to build something strong enough that his belief no longer defined me. And that's a kind of wealth no balance sheet can measure.